For 5 incredibly long years, a grainy photo and a chilling 3-word command were pretty much the only clues in a crime that absolutely horrified the nation: the Delphi murders. Honestly, it seemed like they were destined to become another tragic cold case. But the story of how it was all solved, well, it's a testament to a victim's unbelievable courage and a single, overlooked piece of evidence that changed absolutely everything. These 3 words: "This is the last thing anyone heard," spoken to Abby Williams and Libby German. It's a muffled, terrifying command that became the soundtrack to their final moments. Guys, down the hill. For years, this audio clip was one of the only real clues investigators had to the identity of the man who became known only as the Bringe Guy. So, let's go back. The whole tragedy started on February 13th, 2017. Abby and Libby, just best friends out for a hike. But sometime after 2 in the afternoon, something went horribly, horribly wrong. And in an act of just astonishing courage, Libby started recording a video on her phone, and she captured the man who was walking towards them. The very next day, their bodies were found. And that little piece of video, it would become the single most important clue in the hunt for their killer. Now, you'd think, with the killer's voice and a picture, even a grainy one, this would be a quick solve, right? Well, it wasn't. The investigation stalled. And for the families and the entire Delphi community, this was just the beginning of an agonizing 5-year nightmare. It was a time filled with false hope, dead ends, and this growing fear that justice might never, ever be served. And, the confusion surrounding the case was just perfectly captured by these police sketches. First, back in 2017, they released this image of an older-looking guy. Then, 2 years later, a completely different sketch, a much younger man. And they told the public, hey, focus on the new one. It just left everyone asking the same question. Were they looking for 2 different people? Or had the investigation just completely lost its way? 5. I mean, just think about that number. 5 years of this case just growing colder and colder. 5 years of tips that led absolutely nowhere. 5 years of a killer just walking free. For the families, it must have felt like an eternity. And you can just feel the heartbreak in this quote from Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty. This wasn't just some case file sitting in a drawer. It was a daily, painful reality for these families who were so desperate for answers and for closure that, honestly, it seemed like it might never come. And then, right when it seemed like all hope was lost, a breakthrough. And it didn't come from some dramatic new witness or a high-tech DNA discovery. No, it came from a forgotten piece of paper and a tiny object that had been sitting in an evidence locker for years. So get this, the dam finally broke in 2022. A volunteer clerk who was just reorganizing old files stumbles upon a tip sheet from way back in 2017. And the tip? It was from a local guy, Richard Allen, who admitted he was on the trail that day. This one little discovery forced investigators to re-examine everything. They took another look at an unspent bullet that was found between the girls' bodies, and this time, ballistics experts made a definitive match to a pistol owned by Richard Allen. After 5 long years, they had their man. Okay, so Allen's arrest wasn't the end of the story, not even close. It was the beginning of a super dramatic courtroom battle. The prosecution, they thought they had an open and shut case, but the defense, they were about to unveil a really shocking narrative of their own, one about a flawed investigation and a client who was mentally unraveling. The prosecution's case seemed pretty simple, right? They had the video of Bridge Guy, they had the bullet from Allen's gun, and this is incredible, over 60 confessions Allen made while he was in jail. But the defense had an answer for every single thing. They claimed it was a case of mistaken identity, that the ballistics investigation was bumbling, and that those confessions, they weren't real. And the prosecution's ace in the hole was Allen's own voice. They played these recorded phone calls where he repeatedly told his wife and his mother, "I killed Abby and Libby." For the prosecution, this was irrefutable proof, coming straight from the defendant's mouth. So how do you explain away a direct confession like that? Well, the defense argued that Allen, a guy with no criminal history, had suffered a complete and total mental breakdown in prison. Psychiatrists testified that the harsh, solitary confinement had pushed him into psychosis, which led him to make all these false confessions without even really understanding what he was saying. And the defense didn't stop there. They went on the attack, questioning the integrity of the whole investigation. They pointed to missing interview tapes, flawed ballistics methods, They even tried to introduce this really bizarre alternate theory involving a pagan cult, which just shows how far they were willing to go to create reasonable doubt. The judge, by the way, ultimately shut that argument down completely. So, after weeks of this explosive testimony, it all came down to the jury. Who were they going to believe? Was it the prosecution with their damning physical evidence and all those confessions? Or was it the defense with their narrative of a botched investigation and a defendant who was just lost to psychosis? On November 11th, 2024, the jury delivered its verdict. Richard Allen was found guilty on all charges. For the families in that courtroom, it was a moment of shock, tears, and just overwhelming relief after a nearly 7-year ordeal. Richard Allen was sentenced to 130 years in prison. It was a sentence that ensured the 52-year-old man would never, ever be free again. The long, painful road to justice for Abby and Libby had finally reached its end. You know, in the end, the prosecutor brought the focus right back where it belonged. He paid tribute to the victims, and he highlighted Libby's incredible courage for recording that video, the video that captured her killer's image and voice. It was the key that unlocked this entire case. So what is the legacy of the Delphi murders? It's complicated. It's a story of profound tragedy, of course, but it's also a story of incredible courage. It's a reminder of how forensic science can find the truth in the absolute smallest of details, and how the persistence of a community can keep hope alive. But really, most of all, it's a testament to a 14-year-old girl who, in her final moments, had the presence of mind to capture the evidence that would ultimately bring her killer to justice, ensuring that her voice and her friends would not be silenced.